so basically we have this table. We have the confidentiality property, we have integrity and authentication, and then we have the symmetric key world, and then we have the asymmetric key world. Okay? So for integrity and authentication, in the symmetric key, we're going to learn about MACs, message authentication codes. In the asymmetric key world, we're going to learn about digital signatures. In particular, we're going to learn about RSA. Here we're going to learn about AES in EMAC. So interestingly enough, you'll see that a block cipher like AES can also be used to construct a MAC, not just symmetric key encryption. Here, what we have is symmetric key encryption. What's an example of a symmetric key encryption scheme? Yes, CBC, but AES in CBC mode, for example, because you need a block cipher always. That's an example. What's an example of an asymmetric key? Okay, so we're going to have public key encryption here. What's an example of a public key encryption scheme? Yeah, El-Gamal. Okay, so now let's look into MACs, okay? We studied these two quantities, now we're going to look into MACs, and then later in digital signatures. So MAC stands for Message Authentication Code, okay? And basically the way its syntax looks something like this. So if Alice sends a message to Bob, they have a key that they share. Why? Because this is in the symmetric key world. Okay, so they need to have a shared secret key. Now, she will compute, we're using the MAC scheme, with a key K and a message M. She will get back a tag T. Okay? She will send this tag T to Bob. We'll see that MACs don't provide a confidentiality, right? They just provide integrity and authenticity. They don't provide confidentiality. So anything in this category does not provide confidentiality, and anything here does not provide integrity. And people tend to confuse those. They tend to think, okay, just because it's a cryptographic value, this T might actually hide the message. But in many cases, it doesn't. Okay. So you can, and then what Bob does is he gets the message, so he computes the MAC of the message using the same key, and he's going to check if it's equal to T. If it's not equal to T, then someone tampered. Then the attacker tampered with. So if it's a T prime, instead, then Bob will realize that someone tampered with the message, that it's not coming from Alice, or that it was coming from Alice but was modified. So here's a question. Why does this MAC have to be... So you can think of this MAC as a keyed checksum. No? So why does this MAC have to be keyed? Why do we need to use a key? Can't we just have a MAC of the message directly? Why is this using this key important? Exactly. Without the key, if you don't have the key, is the one piece of information that an attacker doesn't have, because again, the MAC algorithm is public. All the crypto algorithms will be public. Okay, so the attacker doesn't have the key K, but if your MAC doesn't depend on the key K, then even an attacker could compute a new MAC. So the attacker could say, nah, I don't want to send them NT, I'm going to send them prime, and then can compute the MAC of M prime because it doesn't need the key. Okay, so it's important that it has the key. All right, so again, let's talk about the different properties. So correctness. So this is determinism is correct. It's important to be deterministic for correctness. What if the MAC were not deterministic? What would go wrong in how we plan to use it? Exactly. So if this MAC were not deterministic, then when Bob tries to check the MAC and recomputes the MAC for the key K and the message M, might get a different value that won't match the tag from Alice, and then he'll say, oh, there was a corruption when there wasn't. Okay, so determinism is important for correctness. Then, of course, there's the efficiency, namely compute MAC should be efficient, should be polynomial time. Okay? But then security, that's always the more interesting part. So the security basically says that an attacker who doesn't have the key should not be able to produce a MAC for a new message. Okay? You cannot forge a MAC. You cannot create a MAC for a message without having the key. And as usual, we have pretty long names in cryptography. So this definition is called EUCPA, which stands for Existentially Unforgeable Under Chosen Plaintext Attack. Existentially unforgeable under chosen plaintext attack. And the reason is not that difficult to parse it. The point is that the MAC should be unforgeable. Existentially, namely, there should not exist any message for which the attacker can forge a MAC. And then under chosen plaintext attack, it's because, exactly like in INT-CPA, we allow the attacker to play a little bit with chosen plaintexts and get their MACs. So I'm going to write the game. Okay, so the game is, again, you have a challenger, and you have the adversary. And the challenger chooses a key K, and the adversary says, hey, I want to play a little bit. So the adversary says, I'm sending you a message M, and the challenger sends back the MAC of the message, and the adversary can repeat this as many times as the adversary wants. So I'm going to say, MI because there are multiple repetitions. But then the challenge message should be some message that was not requested before, so different from any of the MIs. Okay? And not just that, but the adversary should be able to provide a tag T for it such that the message matches the tag. Okay, so basically, we want that the adversary should never be able to produce a tag for a message he never received the MAC for. So we write that like this. For all adversaries, again, polynomial time, the probability that, again, so you have the key using keygen of the MAC. Usually it's going to be random. And the adversary can play multiple times with this situation, but the adversary cannot basically output a message M and T such that M is different from MI, and MAC with a key K of the message is equal to T. So this should be negligible. Okay, the chance that the adversary is able to produce a MAC for a message he had not seen a MAC for should be negligible. Is it clear what we want from the MAC? You basically, intuitively, you can't forge the MAC. Yeah. What's the checksum? What is a checksum? It's basically just a shorter version of a message, like the digest. Yeah, so that's the whole point, is that you shouldn't be able to have another number that matches the same checksum. Again, these checksums are larger, on the order of 256 bits or 128 bits. And even though there are, in principle, such collisions, like for the hash, they should not be able to be found by regular machines or people. Okay? So again, intuitively, what the security says is that you cannot, no adversaries cannot forge a MAC for, a new message, a message for which they never received the MAC. Of course, if they received the MAC for the message, they know it. but if they didn't, they should not be able to create the MAC. All right, so first the question, just taking a look at these properties of the MAC. Why is it that it does not give you in CPA? For example, sometimes people erroneously think that the MAC, this tag T, hides the message. But why doesn't it give you the in CPA privacy? Again, it's just for integrity. It's not supposed to give you privacy, but there's a property, there's something here that prevents the MAC from achieving in CPA. Yeah. Exactly, the determinism. Remember, in CPA, it's crucial that the encryption is randomized. That when you encrypt the same message, you get different encryptions. But with the MAC, it's deterministic. So if I encrypt two messages, I get the same MAC, so I can tell those messages are the same, and that's some leakage. Okay? So this is really to really see how the MAC doesn't provide privacy, and similarly, we saw how encryption does not provide integrity.